Candy Thomas, Regional Soil Health Specialist for the Central Regional part of the United States, consisting of Iowa, Missouri, Nebraska, Kansas, Illinois, and Colorado. And today I'm coming to you from Delaware, and we are at the tail end of our training where we're putting everything together. This is probably the most difficult portion of the actual planning process, and that's understanding that human component and how difficult it is to work with those folks. So like I said, today we're going to be looking at the social and economic considerations and how we can try to overcome some of those obstacles that we are dealing with on a day-to-day basis when we deal with, the human component of conservation planning. This is generally the most difficult portion of the planning process, is managing people and all the little idiosyncrasies that come along with them.
Farming is steeped in tradition, and their grandfathers, their fathers, their great-grandfathers did it differently, and they had success. So why would you mess with something that's going well?
So at the end of this lesson, you should be able to describe the common challenges to soil health management system adoption and the transition that occurs from that. You also should be able to summarize some of the economic effects of soil health management systems through this partial budget analysis and one case study that I could find that was fairly close to your location. So adopting soil health practices requires not only an understanding of the physical resource data, but also the social data. That's probably the most difficult thing to do. There's a really super great book by the Heath brothers, Chip and Dan Heath. They wrote it, and it's called Switch. And what they talk about within that book is how to get change to happen when change is really hard. And so first off, they relate, change being that sociological aspect of the human psyche. And so when you think of it in the terms of, an elephant, and you're riding on the elephant, and the elephant is that emotional tie that you have to a lot of your background and the people that you live with and that you work with and that you are near in your church and society as a whole. How do we guide that elephant as a rider, us being the thoughtful person that's riding on there that has this rational thought? How do we get rational thought to overcome some of this really very difficult emotional issues? And so steering that elephant is not the easiest thing to do. And if you think of it in the case of, well, it's Christmas time, you're on a diet, you're trying to lose a little weight, not probably the best of the times to be trying to be on a diet, but I've done it and lost some weight, but it wasn't easy. How do we overcome that? When we think of, the cookies being the elephant essentially, and us trying to say, no, I'm not going to touch those cookies. How do you, find what's deep inside of you to say, that's it, no, I'm not going to do it? Well, the way these guys said that they did that was finding these bright stars. And these bright stars are those people that we call our innovators that are located within our counties and our communities as a whole. I know that every single one of us at least has one person, and I know you guys here have a huge amount of adoption of cover crops, but we all know of at least one person who's added cover crops to their rotation. So how did they go about doing that? Then probably for here, the next question is no-till. How do they actually bring no-till into their rotation and look at it as a continuous no-till system instead of, just a rotational no-till? Maybe they'll till before they plant wheat, which I learned, from the folks that I've been working with in my group, which is pretty interesting. So understanding this key human and social and economic considerations, can assist with implementation, like it says, and long-term adoption. So having these little cues that you can kind of help them move along, and that can be, we don't want to be the stick necessarily with pulling out Russell 2 and saying, well, you're eroding above, X, Y, and Z amount. Is that always the best way, to try to beat them down with this compliance stick? Maybe it isn't. Maybe it's, if you tried this, we could reduce this by this amount, which kind of puts it into the schematic that they're thinking about it in terms of, this is an idea that I could adopt, not one that you're forcing me to adopt. And so those bright stars are folks that we can look to figure out how to get the system implemented, how to get it on the land, and how to get adoption after, this adaptation and adoption to occur after going through all these different processes along this adoption diffusion model. So right now I have a poll question that's located in my chat here. So I'm just gonna warn you now. So I'm gonna pop this puppy up. What is your current perception of soil health in your region? So I'm just gonna ask you guys, show of hands, or someone raise their hand and we'll get the mic to you, and just let me know what the soil health perception is in your current area. What do people think about soil health?
Current perception of soil health in your region. I think it's still emerging. I know we've still got we've got a lot of I guess innovators, I guess you would say, here in the state. But there's other folks that obviously, like you had mentioned, Candy. There's a lot of people doing cover crops here in the state. But there's still, a lot of opportunities, I think, with, no tillage or reduced tillage still here in the state. And I think that's one of the things that we kind of could work on a little bit more. We do have a history, a lot of people doing no-till in the state as well, but we also have, we've got a lot of poultry manure here, and, it's one of those things that, people like to incorporate as well, or need to incorporate. So that, I think that's a little bit of a stumbling block too.
Okay. How about that second question? What keeps people from implementing? And how have others overcome these obstacles? And either you can answer or someone else in the room can. Doesn't matter to me. I just like some feedback there, because this is a good question. I mean, this kind of highlights our bright stars, essentially, how we overcome this.
Yeah, I would say the biggest hurdle to implementation is weather, as it has been the last few years. So that coincides with timing. And lastly, I would say financial obstructions.
Okay. Have any of you had people overcome these obstacles at all? And how did they do it? If you have any one that you've worked with. If you haven't, that's okay.
I think we've got some people in the state that are just pushing through with it because they realize that the long-term benefit, is going to be well worth it. So we do have people that have overcome those obstacles, expecting that, they've already started seeing some improvements, and I think we'll see that tomorrow in our field day with a couple of the folks that we're going out to. But they're anticipating, those benefits growing over time. So they've kind of negated that short-term, cost or change in management with that expectation that it will pay off in the long term.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, one current perception, that most people initially agree to do no-till because of that potential to reduce erosion. And, when we look at erosion specifically, there's a really good book by Donald Worster, and I'm sorry, I'm a reader, and so I like to reference a lot of things that I read, and I read a lot of history and soil health stuff, obviously, but a lot of it is, things that we've done to the environment and how do we overcome them. And Donald Worster has this really excellent book called The Dust Bowl. And if you get the unabridged version. And he called erosion, he defined erosion as personal, cultural, and geological. I mean, we've always defined erosion as, sediment, transport, detachment, and then sedimentation someplace else. But if you think about this definition that Worcester came up with, this personal, you can, in the fact that it's something that is a current thing that's going on their land. That person owns it directly. They may blame it on the soils, and they may blame it on, you know, the rainfall, and they may blame it on their climate, but really this is a personal thing that has occurred to them. Some people are feel shamed by it. Even in some communities, they're vilified by erosion. So, you know, that cultural then aspect can come into play where, you know, when we look at how we have gone and farmed, you know, traditionally over the years, you know, when we look at that very first lesson that we went through in the tradition that has been built up from thousands of years of row cropping. Darren Quammen from Civilization Critical, another excellent book, said it best: we loot the past to subsidize the present as we pollute and deplete the future. I mean, those words right there to me are highly telling of that cultural aspect to this soil erosion and how it's, you know, essentially has become acceptable. It's, you know, something that it's like the elephant in the room. You know, we kind of recognize that it's there, but we don't really, here we're back to elephants again. We don't really say, you know, hey, there's an elephant in the room. Other than our agency may say, hey, you've got some erosion occurring out there. What are you going to do about it? You know, maybe we can help you out with that. And geological was his last thing that Worcester talked about. And geological meaning, you know, the climate and the location and the place and all of those things that add up to that. But I'd like to add one more thing to his definition, which is biological. I don't think we are really considering how much we are doing a disservice to soil biology and how they can impact this erosion problem that we're having on a large scale. You know, all of that, according to Worcester, again, results from this ecological, he calls it ecological disequilibrium. When the people-land symbiosis, you know, the caregiving, the thought of the land needing to be there for the next 7 generations that our native peoples have always considered, is completely and totally lacking until now. I think it's kind of a rebirth, and, you know, we call it a regeneration, regenerative ag, and really we are having a rebirth of this total thought process on how we view erosion and you know, what we're going to do about it, and this, you know, giving land to our next generation. I've got a few producers that I work with that generally always do their soil health. I go to their field days and whatnot, you know, and do the rainfall simulator, but then I get to hear them talk. And what's amazing to me is how they get a little choked up, you know, when they talk about what it means to them. So how do we impact change? It's through this adoption and technology transfer, essentially. And so NRCS has this really great document, and it's actually from the 1990s, if you can believe it. They developed this in the early 90s. And if you think about what was going on prior to 1990, there was a pretty big farm bill we had in 1990, but the one prior to that in 1985 was the one that was the big stick. That's the one where we said, if you don't follow through with compliance, you know, therefore you're going to lose your government benefits. And it was really hard, you know, to tell people to do this. So how do we get people all on board? Because, you know, we really didn't want to beat them with a stick. We wanted to try to find a carrot somewhere to make this happen. And so we, NRCS developed this Social Sciences Institute, which I really, really, really wish they'd bring back, because a lot of the information that they have from back then is so very relevant right now, and you can still find some of that. And I'll share with Jamie the document called the Adoption Diffusion Model that came from the Social Sciences Institute, and it's very excellent. And it's just a real short 2 to 3 pager, but they talk about this adoption diffusion model, or adoption tech transfer. So how do we transfer this information, you know, that you've gone through for the past 3 days that is extremely complex, that is very integrated, and is based on ecology, you know, those different ecological processes, the water cycle, the carbon cycle, the energy cycle, the community dynamics. I'm so sorry, I get tongue-tied. How do we get those things relayed to the producer at a level that they understand? Well, we try to get them to adopt, and there again, here comes back to our bright stars. We find that one person who has done this adoption, where, you know, they we look at that behavior associated with an individual's or a group's decision on whether or not to accept new ideas, it says, practices, or products. So we're looking at that and we're trying to figure out how we get that spread about. And you can just see this happening. It's like wildfire. I mean, there are so many new groups, mentorship groups. Kansas, we just started the Kansas Soil Health Alliance, which is a group of producers that are trying to encourage adoption of soil health locally. South Dakota Soil Health Coalition, I've helped out them a couple of times. A phenomenal group to model yourselves after if you want to try to get something started within your state. Cindy Zank does an exceptional job with getting this adoption to occur within her state by making it easy and then transferring it throughout the whole entire state through her schools and information and education. And it's just really a great model to follow. But producers are leading this essentially. And my husband sits and watches YouTube videos all night long. That's what he does. We've got it hooked up to our TV, not YouTube TV, but YouTube. And he'll watch farming videos. He'll watch these videos all evening long. And I'm just like, seriously, can we just like watch something else? And he's like, no, this is really interesting. And then he picks little pieces and kernels from what these guys are doing and then tries it out himself. So like we planted a bunch of cover crops in our pasture, our cool season grass pasture. Probably it was never done in our area. We kind of kept it to ourselves because we're those nuts, that are out there on the end of the tail end of this slide, the innovator group. We're those crazy people that a lot of folks, look at as the nuts in the county. And then we've got this next group called the early adopters, and we have quite a few of these folks. And when we look at our numbers, the total amount of acres of, cover crop adoption, your guys here is huge compared to out west. I mean, it's just gargantuan. And when you look at the numbers for no-till, we're only at about nationally around 43%. And that actually went down a little bit from the 2012 census, the ag census, to the 2017. It went down just about, 6 to 7%, which is unfortunate. And I know why it is in our state. Excuse me. And that's because of herbicide resistant weeds. Right now, folks are trying to find a way out how to handle these, and for them, it's maybe doing a sweep. Out in our way, we have these large implements that has a gigantic V blade on it. It's almost like a vertical tillage tool, and it just slices 2 inches into the ground, so it kills those weeds. And people are getting those back out. But when we look at cover crop adoption, we're only at about 5%. Now, Iowa was at 150%. I mean, they increased that much in a very short amount of time. I'm not sure what y'all have here in Delaware. It'd be interesting to know. But I'm sure it's rather high because of your Chesapeake Bay efforts that you have going on here. And they have been, I know, for quite a few years. So, you guys are in that innovator early adopter category as a whole for the practice of just cover crops. But from what I've been told for the no-till end of it, we're in the early majority, late majority for that part. But you can see this little hole here. We call this the chasm, and that chasm is where these early adopters may fall in after they try to adopt something new and they're not really sure how to get out of it. Something bad happens, and so they may go backwards a little bit. So, to build up these producer groups, get these guys into contact with each other to help each other is probably the best way. If you cannot help them, get them into contact with one of your other producers who's doing a great job, because producers, they love to talk to each other and they learn from each other more so than even our land grant universities, especially when we're talking about soil health. The early majority is kind of where we're essentially working, because these folks have all essentially picked up and have adopted quite a bit. This early majority is now where we're trying to get. So these folks are a little more hesitant about, doing different types of things, but less hesitant than our late majority. That really needs some type of scientific backing behind what they're going to try to adopt. So where I live, these are the folks that will follow our land grant university and whatever they say. And unfortunately, right now, our land grant university is like so far behind, you can't even see them. Then there's this laggard group, of course, who will never adopt, essentially, and we just have to wait them out, until land changes hands or something else happens. So these are our adoption categories, and they're pretty telling about when you look at the people that you work with on a day-to-day basis. You can start lumping them in these categories really easily. And the more you learn about this, the more you start lumping, unfortunately. But if you can get past that, our goal is to transition all these people. We want to transition them all up. So we got to all pull each other up. It like they say. It takes a village, essentially, to get these people moving forward. And so when we look at, this is in that handout that I'll send to Jamie that he could share with you. I mean, some people might be interested in it, some may not, but it is really, really great. When they talk about awareness, these individual stages of adoptions, you can see kind of how these folks have been slowly learning and doing these different things. When we look at our very, innovative group, they've really whipped through these different stages of adoption. So now our early majority became aware of our, Gabe Browns, our Dave Brants, Derek Axton that Marlon was talking about up in Canada, is a highly innovative individual. We've got some folks in the grazing area too, Jerry Doan in North Dakota. All of these, the white oak pastures down in Georgia, all of these different folks have done incredibly innovative things, and they are kind of the pinnacle of what we call our people we want to model after. And so they follow them on YouTube, they read their tweets, they get into groups in Facebook. Jimmy Emmons is a producer that I work with a lot, and he has his own Facebook page within his state. So it's excluded, only available to the people that he lives near, to try to get adoption going in his state. And then he has another group that's larger. And he said when he started that Facebook group with the Noble Foundation, who helped him get it set up, he said he got to the point he couldn't even manage all the questions. So the goal was to get people in there that were a little further along, maybe not as far as he was, but that could help answer. And so then they all had this large scale awareness, and the interest was there. They were reading things, learning things, watching the YouTube videos. And then eventuality, they come, into the office and they're like, hey man, I want to try this. Can you help me out? And so they want to evaluate it. So they'll try it with some of our cost share dollars. And if it works, then our goal is to get them to adopt it large scale. So you can kind of see, if we look at our programs, how we could move people through this system, through the trial and equip, and then eventuality to the adoption of whole scale adaptation to their farm using CSP potentially. So when we look at these different, there's actually 6 stages. The last one is adaptation. That's not in this goofy little cartoon, which is not spelled out here, but adaptation is those things that all our producers are really, really super great at. I mean, there's a whole magazine that my husband gets. I think it's called, it's just a book of people that make stuff out of stuff. And they do things, and it's equipment. It's a pretty cool book. I think it's something about state fair or fair something. I don't remember, but producers can figure out how to do anything with just a few nuts, bolts, and a piece of steel. So this adaptation, taking something and making, something out of nothing, essentially, is what a lot of these farmers are really, good at doing. So that adaptation is that last one. So they'll tweak the system, so to speak, at any given time within, these 5 stages. And like it says, the producer can return to any of these stages at any time during the adoption process. So this next slide, I'm going to have some room, what do you call that? Turn on your microphones, and I need some response back. That's what I'm trying to say, sorry. So as a planner, if you think about those stages that we just went through, those 6 stages, even the adaptation phase, where do you see that you fit in these stages? So just a group question, raise a hand and someone with a microphone come to them and answer me, where do you think you fit in these stages, those stages on that previous slide?
I'm all stages, and I reserve the right to return to any of them at any time.
So as a planner, you feel like you actually fit, you can fit anywhere, right? That's what you said? Just to reaffirm? Okay. All right. See what we say. Good answer. That's exactly right. So you can see where you can fit at any given point in time. So if we go back just one slide here, I'll go back really quick. And you look at, this awareness, I mean, making people aware that soil health is actually a thing is, something that you can do. You can build up interest by going to meetings, taking a few of your producers with you and go to No-Till on the Plains. I'm on the No-Till on the Plains board in Salina, Kansas. And Marlon came to the meeting and he brought some producers with him, as you saw in his presentation. And that's where a lot of these guys go and they meet, or even if you've got a Northeast no-till group, or I noticed out on your table you have a cover crop or a soil health meeting coming up on February 7th through the 8th. And that's a great place to take some producers, that you know of that are interested and bring them along. And then during that evaluation phase, when you talked about where you can fit with maybe some cost share assistance, but I've got an NRCS employee that I work with quite a little bit. She's since retired, which is really sad for me, but she used to keep those slake jars on her desk. And so while she was processing her EQIP payments, how you bring in the producer and they're sitting there and they're waiting so they can sign their 1245, she would put a clod, clod being the crappy soil and the aggregate being the biological soil in each of those jars. And then she would turn and she'd start working on her computer. And this is what the producer has never done anything. And they're sitting there and they're kind of watching this and they ask her what's going on. And so then she's telling them, she's talking to them about how soil biology creates these aggregates. And then she also tells them about a few of their neighbors and how they've started using cover crops to help, get them into this. And tells them again about the clod itself and how it developed, by man, essentially. That's how clods are made. Under extreme pressure and tillage and baking in the sun, and you end up with that, baseball sized clod that doesn't take anything in. And she explains all that to them, and then eventually they get to the point they're like, well, that's interesting. And she says, well, do you want to try it out? Or we've got a sign up coming up, and you can sign up now, and I'll submit your ranking then. And the guy said, yeah, let's do it. And she said, well, and she has a producer group that she works with, and she asked them if she could share their contact information. These were her more innovative producers with, some folks within the county that were wanting to start out, and they're like, sure, heck yeah, we love to talk and help people. And so she would hook them up with the closest neighbor that was the innovator to mentor them. And that mentoring relationship just from those slake jars just evolved. And then she got another one to stick in her pocket as adapting and adopting. So you can see how that works there. So now the next one, back to the show of hands again, so we can get the microphone to you. At what stage can you fail the landowner? Which of those stages? When can you really just screw them up or over, whichever way you want to look at it?
Any of the stages.
Yes, good answer. Gold star to whomever said that. Yes, any stage. And we have a tradition of this within NRCS, essentially from our lack of follow through. When we look at our conservation planning process, we got steps 1 through 9. 9 is, kind of the end of it, but which is the one that we kind of always leave off. 8 is the one where we help them out with some assistance, and 9 is follow-up, where we go back and we evaluate the system and see if it worked all right. So if we're looking at construction practices, we always go back and look and see if the pond dam is still there or if the terraces have washed out. But when we work on management practices, we seem to never go back and say, geez, how did that cover crop mix work for you? Or, what do you think about this no-till? Or, did this new crop you add to your rotation work out for you? We just assume that it's going to work and we go on. Unfortunately, a lot of times we never hear about those failures, but the other farmers in the coffee shops do. Because when you fail, that's when the word spreads like wildfire. It goes throughout the land that, oh, those idiots in that NRCS office, they don't know what they're talking about. You don't want to work with them. That's the one. Unfortunately, negativity spreads, and obviously we've seen that within even social media. The positive things never get the shout out like they need to. So, if you can at all possible, if someone asks you a question, about what do I need to, what cover crop should I use for, adding in more additional nitrogen? Which of these legumes work the best? And if you don't know for sure, find someone who does, look it up, but then always, always, always go back and give them that information. Otherwise, that's where we fall down. So what are some obstacles to soil health adoption? What are some of the ones that you guys know of? This is a microphone again. What are the main obstacles that you have seen? I heard a couple from Jamie, but what do you folks as planners see as obstacles to adoption of soil health?
Old school mentality.
Oh, yes, tradition. Good one. Got any others?
A lot of them, there's just a fear of change.
That is like one of the highest one up there. Yes, you are exactly right. Anyone else? I haven't heard the one I'm used to hearing. It's always the one I hear in Kansas. It's from that late adopter group usually.
Cost?
Cost. Oh my gosh, there it is. Exactly. Yeah, that's the one. That's the main one that we get from that kind of the latter part of the early part of the late majority, and all of late majority. But yeah, quite a few of them will say lack of technical information, and that's just because, they're not really sure about how to implement, this cover crop mix that you developed. Lack of community support, that one you guys talked about, the old coffee shop mentality, people are being drugged down. I've heard this more than once from innovators who feel they are socially ostracized. Economically, yes, we're not helping them, even though we're there. We can't help everybody, right? I mean, we don't have an endless supply of money. Interagency organizational barriers. This was a huge one early on. It's gotten a little bit better when we had those FPAC liaisons that kind of helped a little bit. Jimmy Emmons was one of our NRCS or our FPAC employees that liaison between FSA and NRCS. Crop reporting some of these different cover crops was resulting in these landowners losing their crop insurance because FSA was putting in, if you were growing kale, you can see where this is going. In your mix, you had kale, you had squash, you had daikon radish, you had, you see where this is going, right? These all sound like vegetables. So they were putting down that they were doing vegetable cropping. Now that might have been a very minor part of the mix, but that's all they heard. So then that put them into the double crop category, and therefore they lost their crop insurance, which was not a good thing. And so that's gotten a little bit better, but it still hasn't been solved yet because that is still prevalent throughout the land. Landlord-tenant relationships. This one is huge. Non-operating landowners have a tendency in some people's cases to not care. And some of them care so incredibly much they can't get someone to do these soil health management practices on their land. They can't find someone to do cover cropping and no-till. I've spoken with numerous women landowners who said, how do I get rid of my renter? He just wants to till, and I want no-till, and I want cover crops on my ground. I want to improve it. And so then we talk about leasing and working with their extension office and getting long-term leases developed, because the reason why a lot of these landlords are losing tenants is because of the very short-termness, this year-to-year relationship they have with them on their lease. And in order to do these soil health management practices, we got to look at a longer term lease that allows them to invest in this tenant's property. Economic, and this is that cost one, the installation cost, there's risk aversion, there's management capability, all of these things are roadblocks to them. So when we look at all of these different categories, these look very similar to a form that you all have to fill out every time we do a conservation plan, the CPA 52, right? On that backside, there's that human aspect. There's social on there, there's economics, there's risk. You can see all of these different things and how we have to deal with them, especially when we do conservation planning on a day-to-day basis. So economic considerations, how to move producers. Many of them use these arguments because this is the biggest argument of all. It costs too much. There's lack of time to seed these cover crops. We don't have enough growing degree days. It uses too much water. That's our big spiel in Kansas. These cover crops are going to destroy your following crop. They're using all the water. There's a yield drag. We don't want any extra weeds in their field, How do we overcome all of these different issues? There is a really good group of videos that I'll direct you to from the South Dakota Soil Health Coalition. They got together with Dr. Buzz Clute, who's from, I think, South Carolina State University. He's done some work with us quite a bit as well on some of our videos, but he did this group of videos called Myth or Merit. And in those myth or merit videos, they talk about each one of these different issues. Because I know, water is a big issue out in the western part of the United States. So they talk about water and they talk about yield drag and how they overcome those with actual producers. And so they're a very good group of videos to watch and to glean a little bit of insight in how to overcome these issues. So you can see we've talked about soil function again and again and again, right? I mean, you're just like, I'm almost tired of all this soil function stuff, but this is what soil health is based off of, is improving soil function. And when we look at this list and we think about these from an economic standpoint, you can see how there's a lot of potentially dollars tied to these. They're not immediate, net profit gainers, right away. But as we implement this system over a period of time, we, for sure see soil organic matter increase. We can immediately see reduced erosion when we cover the earth, right? Nutrient cycling, that one comes along, as people start, weaning themselves off of the nutrient, I was going to say a word there, the nutrient need. Increased drought resiliency, building resiliency to not just drought, but even ecological disasters, fire and whatnot, all of these different things. More available water. When you think in terms of, the western part of the United States, some places where they have to pay for their water. Some places have water rights, but they still have to monitor how much they use, which can, we have meters, and if you go over, you pay a fine. So, all of these things can be tied to economics, as you can see there, especially reduced pest and disease, which I always said was that pinnacle, that top of the triangle, that resiliency that you bring back into the soils from, as Willie and Marlon told you, managing for biology. This is that icing on the cake. You start seeing these things being reduced, and that all results eventually into reduced risk, which some of the producers I work with are not really that dependent upon crop insurance anymore. They're utilizing the least amount of crop insurance that they can possibly get away with, other than the fact that we have extreme drought and we have, total hail destruction events. That's the only time that they utilize those. And more often than not, even during the drought, they have such good resiliency with the yields, they're not having to take much in the way of money from that. Category is not easy to quantify. Here again, these are on the back side of your CPA 52. Changes in labor. How do we quantify that? The benefits that we get from improving soil health, such as earthworms, and the soil biota and all of the things that they do, and how do we value soil organic carbon, and how do we really value erosion loss, when we're looking at, 251 million acres and we got over 1.8 billion tons of soil loss per acre per year on those acres. That's a huge amount. How do we tie a dollar value to that? Soil organic carbon, though, we're starting to see is getting to be valued. So we'll see what that does in the next few years when we start paying for these carbon credits. We've got risk. This one is huge. It's hard to overcome. And you know, most people are very, especially if they're producers, are very risk adverse. And then those social impacts. Your grandpa, your dad, you're farming. You've got those social problems that are above your head, and hopefully they're open-minded, but generally you're going to be farming the way your grandpa did if he's still around and he still has a say in the operation. So case studies. This is one of the ways that we have been trying to get, you know, some change happening. And we worked with American Farmland Trust, and we just recently had a really nice webinar that they did on their new economic case study development partial budget analysis tool that they've created. It does a really great job, and I've got one of their case studies here that Flo Schwartz, I believe she was a economist in New York who has since retired and is now working with American Farmland Trust, and she did a really nice job developing these case studies. But they do give you some real world examples, and we're not looking at a full-blown budget here. We're looking at only the change in the operation for one thing. So adding cover crops or putting in no-till or grazing cover crops, those are the things that we want to try to add dollars to. Good case studies address all aspects of adoption, not just the positive. So we're also documenting if there's a yield bump or if there is a yield loss. Excuse me, we're also documenting, all of the costs that are involved in implementing the system. So if you're grazing, adding in fence, the infrastructure that goes with the grazing end of it, also with, adding in new machinery, even the cost of learning is something that we really don't put a value to, but we do have to add that cost as well. It must be relatable. So unfortunately, sorry, Delaware, there's not a lot of relatableness with this because you all don't have one of these, put in place yet for your area, but it should be easy to do now that you have that tool available to you. And you must read them with a very critical eye, which I do even on our research documents. All of the research articles that are coming about soil health, always ask yourself these questions. Are the benefits applicable to you? How about the costs? Were they really, looking at everything? All of that has to come into play. So these budgets look at the positive effects and the negative effects and the increased revenues, and all of this stuff kind of comes into play here. They add up this column and you subtract them and you get your net. It's pretty simple. But there's a lot of different types. They've got these level 1, you can see, which is the descriptive, and then the level 2, which is the quantitative, where we start adding value, and level 3, we put them all in the same units so that they're meaningful, because the pounds per acre does not equal, thousands of dollars for a drill. But when we can get them all in the same set of units, and then amortize them and also consider in risk and all of those other things, what's that one word that I always forget? Depreciation. You got to add that in as well. Then you end up with a pretty good idea of how this works. So this is a case study. This one was actually done in New York. It's on Angel Dairy. I know you do have a few dairies here, and I'll provide this to Jamie so you can take a look at it. But if you just Google NRCS economic case studies, we actually have a web page that houses quite a few of these. It even houses some of the new stuff from Soil Health Institute that's a little more murky. It's not as well spelled out as these case studies that Flo worked on. And also American Farmland Trust, Soil Health Economic Case Studies. You should get about, I think there's 6 of them from 3 different states, 2 in each state. And they do a really nice job of explaining. So this Rose Dairy was in this kind of south central New York. And they wanted to add in cover crops was their goal. They have kind of silt clay soils, so not really the same as you all have here. It's hard to find sand soils other than going to California, which is nothing like y'all are. But here is their partial budget. You can see what they did was they were using silage, of course, quite a bit of silage. And so they were concerned about erosion, and what they wanted to look at was putting in cover crops before the hay and then before the corn, so that they could, reduce the amount of erosion. And so you can see the increases in the net income here. For the corn, they got a yield increase, the costs that they've got. So they've got plant cost savings, hay savings. They had reduced erosion. So we did put a value to erosion here. The nurse crop cost, there wasn't any decreases in net income. So we got a 0 there. And then here's our cost of the cover crops that it took to install. So like I said, yeah, these columns up and this column up, and then we subtract, and we get a net total benefit of $8,150. And then we need to put this again into similar terms to what we were looking at all up here, which is by the acre. So our net acre benefit was $24 to the acre. So just by adding cover crops into this dairy system, you can see that he incurred an improvement there, which would help him then, adopt this system. It might help his neighbor adopt this system if he's doing similar practices, and he's always been totally against it. He might say, that sounds like a doable deal. And after looking at this, I think I can do it. And that's the goal of these. Here's another one. This I got from when I was doing my master's thesis at Iowa State. And we looked at the partial budget essentially, and we were just looking at one change. So very, very simple. And you can see the new system, the revenue that you got from the new system, what you were yielding essentially from the old system, and what the costs were. So this is a friend of mine in Kansas, and we were looking at removing chem fallow, which is a really expensive part of a rotation. I don't know if I even really call it a rotation. It's just a dead period. But we've got our, what he did was he decided to do away with fallow, and instead of doing wheat sorghum fallow rotation, he found that wheat wasn't as profitable. So he's replacing the wheat with a new crop, milo. So he's got, or sorghum, sorry, I forget where I'm at. Sorghum, and then he's doing a full season cover crop. So you can see his cover crop seed costs there were $23, and it cost him $15 to plant and about $14 to terminate. So this is not an organic system. He's using chemical. And the reduced revenue, so his previous yield before getting into this system was around 87 bushels to the acre is what he's getting on his sorghum. After he implemented this for a few years, we looked at it, and he now is getting around on average between 90 and 115 bushels an acre. So we kind of averaged it and said it was 100. And so at the time that we did this, sorghum was going for around $3 a bushel. So you can see he got a little bit of a bump in his revenue from here to here. Got a bit more of a yield bump, but then the cost that he eliminated was maintaining this fallow. So they're doing 4 different herbicide applications in a wheat sorghum chem fallow system. So that 13-month period, they start in June and they'll spray once a month to totally eliminate any vegetation that could take away moisture from the following crop, which would be wheat, because wheat is important in Kansas. I don't know why, but it is. So this cost, that very first application, of course, they're going to use a little more residual in there. And so it's costing them a little bit more on that first operation, but the second through the 4th operation is around $15 an acre, which ends up costing around $66 an acre. So when we put this in terms, we add these up, he's netting around $53 an acre, which is that's a pretty big deal. I mean, this paid for essentially for him removing fallow and going to a more biological system, even though he's doing sorghum, and, cover crops. This was his transition after a couple of years of having cover crops here and there, but now he's eliminating wheat, which has not been very profitable for him in any way, shape, or form because of all the inputs that wheat involves and the low price for wheat. So now we did a sensitivity test in order to see if in the very worst case scenario, what's going to happen. And this is really easy for you to do. And of course, I'll share the slide set with Jamie so you can, replicate this. I just did in Excel. And the sensitivity test, we looked at the very worst possible yield that he could get, which remember was 87 bushel an acre, and the best, we're saying 90. And we looked at grain prices here at the current rate was $3 an acre. And I asked him, I said, what was your lowest grain price? And he said $2 in 2016. He goes, I haven't seen it that low yet for a while. And we did this in I think it was 2018 or 2019. I think we did this. I think it was 2019. And so then we figured that back into that same system. And as you can see, every single time, profit, profit, profit. Didn't matter. Even when the grain price was really just yuck, he's still profiting every single time over fallow. And for you folks out here where you actually get rainfall and you actually don't have to worry about soil moisture as much for a following crop, you're probably wondering, why is this a big deal? You could easily see that fallow would be a 0. It should be pretty straightforward for people to accept that if you're not getting a yield and all you have is expense, then you're not making out very well. Well, it's the cost of the covers and the cost of the water which we could not really put a price to essentially, because it's between $12 to $18 a gallon essentially for water per acre inch. And that's kind of hard to put a dollar value on for a lot of people because wheat is the almighty in Kansas. So it was hard to do, but you could see this system still profitable. And that's just one way to look at risk to help, look at that sensitivity test.
Less tractor hours, less man hours. Hay is, it's going for over $200 a ton right now. We easily paid for the cover crop seeding and the plant and the seed itself and the planting. There's no doubt. And my husband, everything we do with the cows needs to be able to pay for itself, and he's a believer in it. Yeah, they distribute their own manure. We don't have to go haul manure out to the fields.
So there's some things to remember. Adopting a soil health conservation system is a very, 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 very long-term investment. If you don't remember anything else, that's one thing to remember. This is an investment. This is like having a bank account and a savings account or a CD that's only earning you about 1.3% interest. The more you leave it in there, the more things start to accumulate and they start to compound. And eventually by the time you retire, you're thinking, oh my word, I can't wait that long. Well, just think about it. If you wait, 10, 15 years, and you only put in $500, by the time you get done, you might have close to $600 or $700. That might be nice, right? But when we think about organic matter only earning about 0.1% of an increase per year from these soil health management systems in some cases, and when we add animals in, we're seeing them jump between 0.2% to 0.3% per year. Is it doable? Yeah, essentially, but it is an investment. It's not a fly-by-night thing. These cover crops are not magic. Just, keep that in mind. Just like soil degradation does not happen overnight, improving soil health takes time. That's just what I said. And there are agronomic benefits that result in economic benefits. And we looked at those earlier, and those are all our soil functions that we can't really apply a value to, but we know that there's value there. There's value to be had. And to realize the greatest benefit, we gotta find what works best for the producer. We know the principles, those principles, of keeping the soil covered, minimizing disturbance to protect soil biology, adding in living roots and increasing biodiversity to feed the biology. All those principles together can be done anywhere in the United States, anywhere in the world for that matter. And if we keep in mind how we fit those principles to our local conditions, and make them work where we're at, be innovative about how we make those principles work, then we will give the producer the keys to achieve their goals and objectives. Then and only then will we do this.
We now are to the point where we've taken inputs out of the equation. We no longer apply synthetic fertilizers. We don't apply any chemicals. We do nothing that is outside of trying to work with Mother Nature. Before we jumped into this organic leap of faith that we're on, we were at a massive reduction of inputs, 75% reduction of inputs. And we were still maintaining yield, if not increasing yield. So at that point in time, our ROI, which is your return on investment, was as high as it's ever been. Right now, we are on, I'm going to say $200 an acre of savings of inputs. And on a farm our size, that's a little over $1 million. That's serious money.
And when we look at this, from the standpoint of solving problems versus symptoms, and for the last, probably 60 years of NRCS's history, and I think we've been around getting close to 80 years pretty soon, we've only been managing symptoms. If we look at aggregate stability from the standpoint that it is the key and sole source of all erosion across the whole world, and when we're not managing for biology and we lose that organic matter and we lose that house, that structure, and we're not feeding soil biology, then we're open to total soil destruction across the land. And if we manage that using different management techniques, not, hate to say it, not engineering techniques, will we see, the benefit to this system. I'm not saying that we shouldn't still use terraces, because we've got to fix these severely eroded fields. I'm not saying that we shouldn't have waterways. We have to fix these severely eroded fields before we start this system. But we can't say that if we put terraces on, we're going to totally eliminate sheet and rill erosion, because we're not. It's a concentrated flow practice. We've got to increase infiltration, and we do that by improving aggregate stability. And if we give these producers these simple principles to use, and the practices that go along with them that you learned about over the last 2 days, then they have the keys to improve. Moving from adoptions to awareness, you need to work to develop these relationships with these producers. This isn't just signing them up for a program, having them come back in and sign again. This is a real relationship that you're going to build with these folks. And to me, it's probably one of the most fulfilling things you can do. Pursue opportunities for producer education. If you can, have rolls, coffee, and donuts with them. Bring in all your innovative producers, in your county or even in a neighboring county, and invite a few other people that you think might be on the cusp of making a change, and let them talk. And just be a facilitator. We're not telling you to be the teacher here, a facilitator. I always call myself a conservation enabler. I'm out there enabling people with education and the tools and the keys to move forward. And that is all I am doing. I am not actually doing this for their system. I'm not doing it to their system. I'm providing them with the tools. And you can too, because you've had a lot of education over the last 2 days. It's hard to keep it all in though. Invite and accompany them to soil health related events. We already talked about that. Take them to the meeting that you're going to have here in February. It's a great opportunity. You'll get to see Ray Archuleta and Jimmy Emmons. Jimmy is a huge proponent for soil health. Long live the soil. That's his motto. And he's super to learn from. I think you'll get a lot out of it. Invite them to the field and do the assessment together. Even if it's, I know Delaware's assessment's a little bit different than ours, but the landowner is hungry for this type of information. They want to know what's going on in their soil. And when you crack that soil open and you show them some of those things that you know about now, they just, I get I'm part of 2 or 3 different text groups and get pictures and questions and look what my soil's doing today. And hey, will you come out and do an infiltration ring for me? Because I just want to see if I've improved. And so I keep track of that for them. I'd take a GPS point and write down what it took, how long it took. And that way they don't have to worry about it. I just put it in a folder and save it and go back periodically every 3 to 5 years, and we do it again, and they love it. I mean, they love finding soil biology. Just ask Jimmy if you get to go to his field day about his proscope that he has for his for his iPad. I had mine, and then he saw it, and we were digging around in the soil at a field day, and he had just the little Carson, the little 10x hand lens, and he was laying down full out on the soil, looking at some soil biology. And I got out the proscope, the micro mobile. Now I've got just a cheap little clip-on that hooks on my phone, and we looked at some different, minuscule, the mesofauna essentially in the soil, and oh man, he loved it. After that, he's sending me pictures all the time. What's this? What's this? And that soil macrofauna field manual has a really good ID in it, so that way you can, tell them what they're seeing, and they love knowing what they're seeing. Conduct demos. There's a lot of different demos that can be done. The ones that Jamie showed you, infiltration, slake, having those desktop rainfall simulators, those little desktop, I mean, you don't have to have the big rainfall simulators, just a group of those. I've got a group of what I call my redneck soil tests, and they're just things that you can get at the dollar store. And I've been to 2 or 3 producer meetings and showed people how to use those, and they just love that, because that's things that they can do then on their own. But having the rainfall simulator at fairs, all of these things, for a lot of people, that rainfall simulator is a catharsis for change. Believe it or not, I did it in Southwest Kansas. I had some soil from a wheat fallow producer who used a lot of anhydrous. And then we smelled that soil that went through those infiltration jars that Jamie had there after it sat for a while and got really saturated, and we smelled it, and they could smell that nasty kitchen sink anhydrous smell versus that earthy, wonderful smell of the well-managed soil. And the next year I went back and did the rainfall simulator again at the same meeting, and the guy was in the audience. I didn't know it. We got done and he goes, "Hey, are you going to have him smell it?" And I was like, "Oh, wait, I remember you." And I go, "Well, sure. If you guys want to smell this, come on up and give it a smell." And he goes, "Believe it or not, I quit using anhydrous after smelling that soil last year." So just goes to show, you never know who you're going to impact in what way. Use discussions about erosion on their fields to transition to principles and opportunities. This should be the easiest thing for you to do. Keeping the soil covered. It's a no-brainer. Develop and coordinate an email listserv. And if you're interested in how to go about doing that, I've got that information. You can even start a social media group on Facebook. I'm part of a group, the Nebraska-Kansas Soil Health Alliance. We have, producers and NRCS employees from all over the world, not NRCS employees, but producers from all over the world, and researchers who've joined that group. And if you want to, you can just ask, and I'll add you to the group. Just send in a request for the Nebraska-Kansas Soil Stewardship Group. It's a positive place where all things soil health are talked about. Not a lot of tillage on there, because these guys are the old school. We're not doing tillage unless we absolutely have to. Everything cover crops is another group that allows a lot of tillage. A friend of mine, he kind of manages that. He's not real fond of it anymore because of all the negativity that's occurring in there, but they try to keep it positive. Conduct periodic coffee shop. We talked about that. What other approaches do you think? So this is a shout out to you all. What other things? I give you a list of some different things here. What are some other things you think you could do to engage your producers? So I just asked that of the group, if anyone wants to raise their hand, and we'll get some feedback here. I added quite a few, but I bet most folks have better ideas than I do.
So Candy, I can tell you, you pointed out the Soil Health Summit that's coming up in February. I know you and Carl saw that card the other day out on the table at the entryway. But we've got a Delaware Soil Health Partnership here in the state, and it's very, very active. That's the group that's working with the Soil Health Summit. That group's also organized, caffeine and cover crops. It was actually a meeting that started in person before COVID, and then it went virtual after that, where we've had people, farmers, university people from NRCS, from the districts, all join and talk about cover crops. We've had presenters come from the outside as well. Those are some of the things that we've done. I mean, you guys are involved in quite a bit of. We had the No-Till November, effort here last. Yep, last year. In fact, I think Phil King, our state soil scientist, is wearing the gator that everybody got because it was during COVID that has the No-Till November hashtag on it. What's some of the other things that we've done, guys, that you could, well, actually, Owen's got one on, so. Oh, yeah, we had a billboard effort here in the state. Jay Baxter, who is one of the sites we're going out tomorrow to visit, he was actually on a bill with several billboards in the state, promoting soil health here in Delaware as well.
Yeah, you can't do better than a billboard. Geez, that's out there. When you think about showcasing something you're doing, that's a big deal.
Yeah, I know quite a few. I know some of the Facebook local or district Facebook page. They post quite a bit about soil health events and things going on with soil health in the state. In fact, I think the slake and infiltration test that we have here went out on the newsletter today at 1 o'clock already. So that's already hit the streets as well.
You don't have to buy, all the stuff from like Bud Davis through conservation demonstrations. He's got some really fantastic slake tubes, and they're great for, like if you're doing big time demos and whatnot. But, just some ball jars in those bags from onions, the onion bags, how they're kind of meshy. I mean, and a rubber band, and you just put them in those ball glass jars, fill them up with water, and then collect some good and some poor soils and let them dry out, and away you go right there in your own office. I mean, it's so easy to do. I've got some good fact sheets specifically on doing the slake infiltration and runoff that I'll also give to you, Jamie, so that you can share with folks, so that way they can use those for tips and techniques. We also have a video that Doug Peterson did that we'll share with you, where he shows, those same demos, just another way of doing it, different types of soils, and talks about how he does it. The more you watch people do that, the more you learn, and the easier it is to do, I think. I also have a book list, Jamie. I don't know if you want it or not, but I'm going to email it to you, of a lot of different soil health references, that I've read. I've read all of them that is on the list. I got a couple more I'll add that I just recently finished, and then I'll send it to you because I don't have them on there. But that's another thing I'll send you besides the sociological handout that we have from the old Social Sciences Institute. But yeah, all those are great things. And I mean, when you're thinking about putting this all together, when you get to the point where you start working on your plan, this essentially is kind of the hardest part. So how do you go about, selling this to someone, in your given scenario that may have some, negativity above them, say it's their dad or something, or they have a spouse that doesn't really care about it, or, how do you sell it even better to someone who's interested? How do you keep them engaged? These are all the things, that are part of that human component of the planning process that is not the easiest to do. And I know it's getting harder for some of our newer planners to really take on and embrace because of, the way people are today. They're a little more phone based. And that's not easy because you got to be, pretty people based. But even our producers are getting pretty phone based. I mean, if you can have a texting relationship about soil health, that's pretty decent. If you can't, do one-on-one, face-to-face, but getting them out there and getting them interested, that's what it's all about. With that, if you guys have any questions, I got a little bit of time to take them, and it's essentially time for you to all get to the point where you're going to start finalizing your soil health management system plan. So this is the last icing on the cake, I would say. Hopefully your cake is good.
Any questions before we move on to our soil health management plan? All right, thank you very much, Candy.
Yep. Thank you for your attention.